I am Clara, 34 years old, and until recently, I was the undisputed outcast of my wealthy in-law's family. My mother-in-law, Patricia, actually held a formal vote in her living room to ban me from all future family events. I watched as every single person, including my own husband, raised their hands to erase me. My daughter clung to my shirt crying. I did not scream or fight back. Instead, I hugged my little girl and walked out. What none of them realized was that 3 days later, they would receive a certified letter from a top-tier corporate law firm that would completely silence their arrogance and flip their entire high society world upside down. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to smile through the disrespect of toxic in-laws while secretly holding the power to ruin them. The Easter Sunday gathering at Patricia's house in the affluent suburbs of Chicago felt suffocating. I sat on a stiff velvet chair wearing a simple floral dress I had bought on sale, keeping a watchful eye on my daughter Lily. Patricia loved to host these lavish holiday affairs just to remind everyone of her status. She wore a tailored silk suit, her neck heavy with diamonds. My sister-in-law Rachel sat across from me sipping a mimosa and pretending to be a successful fashion mogul. Her husband Jamal scrolled through his phone next to her. Jamal was a luxury car broker, a tall African-American man who loved nothing more than validating Patricia's snobbery to elevate his own position in the family hierarchy. Travis stood near the fireplace nursing a scotch and aggressively avoiding my gaze. The tension had been building since we arrived. I was used to the snide remarks about my modest background, the backhanded compliments about my cooking, and the general consensus that I was holding Travis back from his true potential. But I never expected Patricia to turn her hostility into a spectator sport. Patricia picked up a silver spoon and tapped it sharply against her crystal wine glass. The room fell silent. Everyone looked at the matriarch of the family. "I have an important announcement to make regarding our upcoming family calendar," Patricia said, her voice projecting across the room. "As you all know, my 40th Ruby anniversary celebration at the country club is approaching. It will be the social event. The guest list includes city council members, real estate developers, and the board of directors. It is a highly curated environment." She paused, letting her gaze sweep over the room before landing squarely on me. The coldness in her eyes was absolute. Therefore, Patricia continued, "I am calling for a formal family vote. I propose a permanent ban on Clara attending the anniversary gala, and quite frankly, all future family events hosted at my home or the club. Her cheap demeanor and constant reminders of her working-class roots are a persistent embarrassment to our social standing. I will not have my reputation tarnished by someone who cannot behave in polite society. My decision is absolutely final." Yes, I froze. The sheer audacity of her words felt like a physical blow. I looked around the room waiting for anyone to tell her she was being ridiculous. I looked at Travis, expecting my husband to step forward and defend his wife. He took a slow sip of his drink and looked at the floor. Before I could even process the betrayal, Jamal leaned back on the velvet sofa and chuckled loudly. He reached into his designer jacket, pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, and casually tossed it across the coffee table. It landed right in my lap. I looked down. It was an invoice from a luxury cleaning service. $500. Jamal adjusted the massive gold watch on his wrist, a watch I knew for a fact was leased. "Your kids spilled grape juice on Patricia's authentic Persian rug last Thanksgiving," Jamal said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You did not even have the cash to replace the rug or pay for the emergency cleaning. Travis had to put it on his credit card. Stay out of upper tax bracket spaces, Clara. You do not belong here, and you are bringing down the brand," Rachel chimed in, adjusting her perfect posture. "It is true, Clara. You always look so uncomfortable around our friends. It makes everyone else uncomfortable. You would probably be happier staying home anyway." The breath left my lungs. They were actually doing this. They were holding a tribunal in the middle of Easter Sunday to formally excommunicate me from the family. I looked down at Lily, who was sitting on the floor near my feet with her coloring book. She had stopped drawing. Her big brown eyes were darting between her grandmother, her uncle, and me. She was only 7, but she was smart enough to understand the tone of the room. She knew her mother was being attacked, so Patricia said, folding her hands together, "All in favor of the ban, raise your hand." Patricia raised her hand immediately. Rachel raised hers with a synchronized swiftness. Jamal lifted his hand high in the air. I turned my head slowly toward the fireplace. My heart pounded against my ribs like a trapped bird. Travis was still staring at his shoes, his jaw clenched. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Travis," I whispered. He finally looked up. His eyes met mine for a fraction of a second, filled with a pathetic mixture of cowardice and irritation. Then, deliberately and clearly, my husband raised his right hand into the air. He voted to ban me. The man who vowed to protect me, the father of my child, sided with the people treating me like dirt. I grabbed my daughter and we quickly walked away. Before I could reach the arched entryway of the living room, a heavy hand clamped down on my shoulder. I turned, expecting to see a glimmer of remorse in my husband's eyes. Instead, Travis glared at me, his face flushed with a mixture of expensive scotch and raw irritation. He pulled me slightly away from the rest of the room, though his voice remained loud enough for everyone to hear. "Stop making a scene, Clara." Travis hissed, his grip tightening just enough to leave a bruise. "You are acting completely unhinged over a simple family decision. Look at you. You are practically hyperventilating." I looked at the man I had married. He was wearing a bespoke Italian suit he had purchased just last month on a credit card he assumed I was paying off. His hair was perfectly styled, his jaw clenched in that signature arrogant way he adopted whenever he was around his mother. "A simple family decision," I repeated, keeping my voice dangerously low, mindful of Lily clutching my leg. "Your mother just banned your wife from her life and you voted in favor of it." Travis rolled his eyes, letting out a sharp sigh of exhaustion. "Because you do not belong here, Clara," he snapped. "You never have. You walk into these events looking like a nervous intern. You do not understand how things work in this tax bracket. My mother has an image to maintain for the country club board, and having you bumble around her ruby anniversary party in some discount rack dress is going to ruin the aesthetic." I felt Lily bury her face into my hip. She was trembling. I gently stroked her hair, keeping my eyes locked on Travis. "So that is it," I said, my voice eerily steady. "I am bad for the brand." "Do not twist my words," he replied, crossing his arms over his chest. "Just take an Uber home. Take Lily with you, since she cannot seem to behave around expensive things anyway. I am staying here." He gestured toward the velvet sofa where Jamal and Rachel were watching us with thinly veiled amusement. "I want to enjoy the rest of this holiday with my real family." My real family. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. For a brief moment, the silence in the room was deafening. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked methodically. The ice clinked gently in Patricia's crystal glass. 5 years ago, those words would have broken me. I would have cried in the car all the way home, wondering what was wrong with me, wondering how I could change to make them love me. But today, I felt nothing but a cold, hard clarity. The last thread of obligation I held for Travis snapped, severing completely. He had chosen his side. He had chosen the facade. I gently pulled my shoulder out of his grip. "All right, Travis," I said. "Enjoy your real family." I turned my attention entirely to my daughter. I crouched down to her eye level, ignoring the burning stares of my in-laws. I used my thumb to wipe a stray tear from Lily's cheek. "It is okay, sweetie," I whispered to her. "We are leaving now. We are going to go get some ice cream, just you and me." Lily sniffled and nodded, grabbing my hand tightly. I stood up, my spine perfectly straight. I did not rush. I did not run. I walked to the coat rack by the massive mahogany front doors with the deliberate, measured pace of a woman who completely controls her environment. I helped Lily into her denim jacket, buttoning it up to protect her from the brisk spring wind outside. As I put on my own coat, I turned back toward the living room. Patricia was standing near the grand piano, a triumphant smirk plastered across her face. She had won. She had successfully exiled the working-class trash from her pristine old money sanctuary. She took a slow, victorious sip of her wine, her eyes locking onto mine, daring me to say something defensive. I did not give her the satisfaction of an argument. I told Lily to wait by the door for just a second. I walked slowly across the imported Persian rug, the very same rug Jamal had mocked me over. My cheap shoes made no sound against the thick wool. I stopped exactly 1 foot away from Patricia. The smirk faltered on her face for a fraction of a second. She was not used to me standing my ground. She expected me to cower, to keep my eyes averted, to accept my punishment like a dutiful, inferior subject. But I stood tall, looking directly into her eyes. I leaned in, closing the distance until my lips were just inches from her ear. The scent of her expensive floral perfume was overwhelming, but I did not flinch. "Enjoy this house, Patricia," I whispered. My tone was completely deadpan, void of any anger or malice. It was a simple statement of fact. Enjoy the vaulted ceilings. Enjoy the crystal chandeliers. Enjoy this rug. Memorize every single inch of it. Patricia pulled her head back slightly, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Excuse me," she scoffed. "Are you threatening me in my own home?" "It is not a threat," I replied, keeping my voice barely above a whisper so only she could hear. "It is a countdown. You have exactly 72 hours left." Patricia let out a sharp, derisive laugh. She looked me up and down, taking in my inexpensive dress and sensible shoes. "You have completely lost your mind," she sneered. "Get out of my house before I have Jamal throw you out. You are a broke, pathetic project manager, Clara. You have nothing. You are nothing." I gave her one last, calm smile, the kind of smile you give someone who is standing on a trapdoor, entirely unaware that you hold the lever. 72 hours, I repeated softly. I turned my back on her, walked over to the entryway, and took Lily's hand. I opened the heavy mahogany door, stepping out into the bright afternoon sunlight. I did not look back as the door clicked shut behind us. I pulled out my phone and ordered a premium black car service, not a standard rideshare. It was time to stop playing the role of the struggling wife. As the sleek black vehicle pulled up to the curb, I buckled Lily into the back seat. My phone buzzed in my purse, signaling the start of a war they had unknowingly initiated. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the quiet, dimly lit entryway of the small townhouse Travis insisted we live in to save for his real estate investments. It was a stark contrast to the sprawling suburban palace where we had just been humiliated. The silence of the house usually comforted me, but tonight it felt heavy with the weight of the last few hours. My heart was still pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs as I remembered the collective betrayal of the vote. Every hand raised against me was an image burned into my mind. I set Lily down on the rug and helped her out of her stiff holiday coat. She was still sniffing, her little hands gripping the hem of my skirt for safety. "I am sorry for today," I whispered, kneeling to look her in the eyes. "We are going to make some hot chocolate, and then we are going to watch your favorite movie. You are safe with me, and nothing they said matters. I am never going to let them make you feel small again." She gave a small, shaky nod, her trust in me the only thing anchoring me to the floor. I led her to the kitchen, the linoleum cold beneath my feet. I was filling the kettle when my phone chimed. It was a sharp, aggressive sound that cut through the quiet. I picked it up, expecting an apology from Travis, but the message on the screen was a cold slap of reality. The bank alert showed that our joint credit cards had been declined. I frowned, tapping the screen to see the notification details. Access revoked. I stared at the message, wondering if it was a system error. Then a follow-up text from Travis lit up my phone. It was sent from the dinner table, likely while he was still laughing with his mother. "I have decided to take $50,000 from our joint savings account to partner with Jamal on his new luxury gym venture," Travis wrote. "It is a guaranteed win, and honestly, you have never been good with finances anyway. You should be grateful I am investing in our future instead of letting that money sit around doing nothing. Consider yourself on a budget. You figure out your own groceries this month." I read the words 3 times, the coldness spreading from my fingertips to my chest. He was not just locking me out of the family. He was trying to starve me out. He was betting our life savings on Jamal, a man whose only business expertise was selling luxury car leases he could barely afford. Travis had always viewed my job as a hobby and his own financial risks as genius moves. He had been planning this move for weeks, waiting for the right moment to strike, while he had the social backing of his mother and sister to protect him from my reaction. I felt a surge of adrenaline, but it wasn't fear. It was the icy, calculated calm of a strategist identifying a weakness in the opposition. I did not panic. I did not cry. I simply walked over to the kitchen table, pulled out my laptop, and opened the lid. The screen glowed, illuminating my face in the dark kitchen. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I bypassed the public banking apps entirely and navigated to a private, heavily encrypted banking portal. This was the digital vault for my real life, the life none of them knew existed. While they were busy counting my grocery bills and mocking my professional title, I had been silently building a fortress. I entered my password, a string of characters only I knew, and bypassed the two-factor authentication. The interface loaded, displaying the true state of my net worth, a figure that would have made Patricia choke on her wine. I had been funneling my earnings, the profits from my anonymous property holdings, and my business consulting fees into this account for years, carefully shielding them from Travis and his reckless spending habits. I watched the cursor blink, waiting for me to make my move. The money Travis thought he was stealing from the joint savings account was a pittance compared to what I held in this private account. He was stealing from a pool of money I had already earmarked for depletion. I looked at the screen and realized I had the power to stop the transfer, but that would be too predictable. I wanted him to take it. I wanted him to feel the thrill of what he thought was a successful theft, only for him to realize later that he had burned the wrong bridge. I watched the live transaction feed. Travis had initiated a wire transfer. The bank was holding it for verification. All I had to do was click a button to authorize the release of the funds from the joint account. I tapped my fingers on the desk, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. I was giving him enough rope to hang himself. Once he moved that money into his and Jamal's high-risk gym venture, it would be gone. And when the investors came knocking on his door, asking for the money he had promised, but could no longer provide, because I had already secured the house, he would find himself in a position he had never known. Poverty. I looked at the screen and authorized the transfer. Travis, you just made the most expensive mistake of your life, I whispered. I stood up and walked back to the living room to finish the hot chocolate. The house was quiet, and for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a blank page. The countdown had begun, and Patricia, Travis, and the rest of the toxic cabal had no idea that their destruction had just been scheduled. I turned the stove on and watched the milk begin to steam. I had a daughter to protect and a world to reclaim, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. My phone vibrated against the kitchen counter, shattering the quiet. The screen flashed with his name. I let it ring 3 times before sliding my finger across the glass to answer. I did not say hello, I just listened. Clara, what the hell did you do? Travis roared into the receiver. His voice echoed slightly, meaning he had me on speakerphone. I could hear the faint ambient noise of the living room in the background. Jamal was muttering something indistinguishable. I poured my hot chocolate into a ceramic mug. What do you mean, Travis? Do not play stupid with me, he snapped. I just tried to initiate the wire transfer for the gym partnership with Jamal. The bank blocked it. I checked the joint savings balance, and it is negative $400. Where is the $50,000? Where did you hide my money? I took a slow sip of the hot chocolate. I did not hide anything. I simply removed my half of the assets plus my salary deposits from the last 6 months. You spent your half on Ethereum gas fees and worthless altcoins your friends promised would go to the moon. Are you out of your mind? Travis shouted. You cannot just drain a joint account. That is marital property. I am calling the police. I am calling my lawyer. You are going to jail for theft. I leaned against the counter and smiled at the sheer panic in his voice. You might want to hold off on calling your lawyer Travis, unless you want him to charge you $500 an hour to explain a document you already signed. What document? He demanded. I could hear Jamal in the background asking if the deal was falling through. Travis hissed at him to give him a minute. The post-nuptial agreement, I said calmly. A heavy silence fell over the line. I could practically hear the gears grinding in his head as he desperately tried to remember. Exactly 1 year ago, I continued, my voice steady. You decided my cautious approach to finances was suffocating your entrepreneurial spirit. You wanted a second mortgage on this townhouse to buy into a volatile crypto staking pool. I refused to sign the loan. You threw a massive tantrum and stayed at the house of your mother for 3 days. Patricia told you a real man controls his own capital. I did not hear a word from Travis. He was breathing heavily into the phone. So your mother hired a lawyer to draft a post-nuptial agreement, I reminded him. The goal was to legally separate our financial identities so you could leverage your half of the equity in the house without my permission. You were so eager to prove your financial dominance that you signed the paperwork the very day it was drafted. You laughed in my face and told me I would not be entitled to a single dime of your profits. That was for the business investments, Travis stammered, his voice losing its aggressive edge. That did not mean you could just empty our savings. Clause 4 subsection B, I recited. All liquid assets held in joint accounts shall be divided equally, and any future earnings deposited by either party shall remain the sole property of the depositor, free from the claims of the other spouse. You legally severed our finances, Travis. I stopped depositing my paychecks into the joint account 11 months ago. You just never noticed because you were too busy watching fake numbers bounce around. You planned this. He accused, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and humiliation. You set me up. You set yourself up, I corrected. You wanted financial independence from your working-class wife. You got it. The $50,000 you thought was sitting in that account was a phantom. You spent your actual cash months ago. The negative balance is from the automatic drafts for your luxury car insurance and your exclusive golf club membership. They hit the account this morning. I heard a loud crash on the other end of the line. The voice of Jamal rose sharply, asking where his capital was. Travis was breathing erratically. He was standing in the living room, completely exposed as a fraud. He had no money for the gym. He had no power over me. You are a vicious person, Travis sneered. My mother was right about you. You are nothing but a parasite who dragged me down. You think you have won because you hid a few $1,000s. I did not reply. I let him spiral. I am done with you, he spat. I am filing for divorce first thing tomorrow morning, and do not think you are keeping that townhouse. I am forcing a sale, and I am taking full custody of Lily. You are going to be living in a cardboard box by the time my lawyers are finished with you. Divorce is a big step, Travis, I said, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. Are you sure you want to throw away 10 years of marriage just because you overdrawn an account? It is not just the money, he yelled. I have already moved on. I found a real woman. She respects my vision. She does not nag me about budgets. She understands my genius. We have been together for 4 months. She is moving into the townhouse with me as soon as I kick you out. I listened to his confession. He had abandoned his child, voted to exile me, and confessed to a long-term affair, all on a recorded line. I understand, I said quietly. Pack your garbage and be gone by Friday, Travis commanded. You are a failure, Clara. I reached out and pressed the button to end the call. Travis thought he had just destroyed my world. He had no idea that his demand for a divorce was exactly what I needed to trigger the next phase of my protocol. My phone vibrated violently against the marble countertop before I could even take a sip of my drink. Travis was calling back. I watched his name flash across the screen, a digital embodiment of his bruised ego. I let it ring twice before tapping the green icon and placing the device on speakerphone. I did not say a word. I just let the silence bait him. Are you seriously hanging up on me? Travis bellowed, his voice cracking with unchecked rage. You do not get to hang up on me, Clara. You do not hold the cards here. You are a broke, pathetic liability, and I am cutting you loose. I calmly leaned against the cabinets, crossing my arms. He was unraveling, desperate to regain the upper hand. You think you are so smart with your little bank account trick? He continued, his tone dripping with venom. But you have nothing, and my new girlfriend understands that. She respects my grind. She is moving in Clara. He paused, waiting for me to scream, to cry, to beg. When I offered only silence, he pushed harder. I am taking everything, Travis snarled. I am taking full custody. You are going to walk out of this marriage with the clothes on your back. Pack your bags and be out of my house by the end of the week. Friday morning, I want your keys on the counter. You are finished. I reached out and tapped the red button, cutting off his frantic breathing. The kitchen fell completely silent. The sheer audacity of his threats was almost laughable. He actually believed he owned the ground I was standing on. I picked up my laptop and carried it to the dining table. I opened a secure email application, bypassing the standard clients for a heavily encrypted server. I opened a new message thread addressed to my primary corporate attorney, a sharp, ruthless litigator named Harrison. The subject line was simple: Initiate Transfer Protocol, Omega. I began to type, my fingers moving with rhythmic precision. Harrison, it is time. Execute the transfer of all remaining liquid assets tied to the secondary trusts into the primary holding accounts. Ensure all legal notices are drafted and ready for immediate delivery. I signed the email with my digital authorization key. I was not operating as Clara, the modest project manager and submissive wife. I was operating as the sole proprietor and managing director of Lumina Holdings, LLC. For the past 5 years, Lumina Holdings had been the shadow empire I built while Travis was busy playing pretend businessman. When my first strategic investment doubled in value, I leveraged the profit into a portfolio of high-yield residential properties. Lumina Holdings grew exponentially. My in-laws constantly mocked my modest wardrobe and quiet demeanor, entirely oblivious to the fact that my net worth eclipsed their combined generational wealth 10 times over. Travis wanted to threaten me with homelessness. He wanted to claim ownership of a house he could barely afford the property taxes on. I hit send on the email before confirming the message was officially delivered. I closed the laptop and walked upstairs to check on Lily. I pulled the blanket up to her shoulders, brushing a curl from her forehead. Travis thought he could take her from me. He thought his mother's money could buy him a favorable custody ruling. He had no idea what kind of legal and financial firepower was about to descend upon him. The next morning, the bright spring sun streamed through the kitchen windows as I made myself a cup of dark roast coffee. I felt incredibly rested. The anxiety that had plagued my marriage for years had completely evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating energy. I was reviewing a quarterly earnings report for Lumina Holdings on my tablet when my phone rang. The caller ID displayed Rachel's name. My sister-in-law never called me unless she needed a favor or wanted to deliver an insult. I tapped the screen to answer. "Good morning, Rachel," I said, keeping my tone perfectly pleasant. "Travis called us last night," Rachel said, immediately skipping any pretense of a greeting. Her voice was giddy, practically vibrating with malicious joy. "He told us everything, Clara. He told us about the divorce. He told us about his new girlfriend. She sounds absolutely lovely, by the way. A real upgrade. Mom is already planning to invite her to the country club for brunch next weekend." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "That is very welcoming of Patricia." Rachel let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "You do not get it, do you? You are completely delusional. Travis is taking the house and getting full custody of Lily. Mom has already retained the best family law attorney in the state for him. You are going to be homeless, you pathetic loser. You are going to be living in your car while another woman raises your child. I hope you packed your cheap little dresses." She did not wait for a response. She laughed again, a harsh grating sound, and hung up the phone. I pulled the phone away from my ear and set it gently on the granite counter. A genuine, unrestrained smile spread across my face. Rachel and Travis thought they held the ultimate trump card. They believed that because Travis's name was on the original deed, he controlled the property. They believed they could force me into the streets. What Rachel did not know, what Travis had completely failed to realize when he stopped paying attention to our mail, was that his previous mortgage lender had sold his loan. 6 months ago, his bank had offloaded a package of residential mortgages to a private equity firm. That private equity firm was Lumina Holdings, LLC. Travis did not own the house. I did. And he had just missed his third consecutive payment. The eviction notice would be on the front door by tomorrow morning, legally binding absolute. The elevator doors slid open with a soft, muted chime revealing the sprawling glass-walled reception area of Lumina Holdings. I stepped onto the polished marble floor, leaving the modest, long-suffering wife persona behind in the suburbs. Here, 30 floors above the bustling Chicago financial district, I was exactly who I had built myself to be. I wore a tailored charcoal blazer over a crisp silk blouse, my heels clicking a steady, authoritative rhythm as I walked past the minimalist art installations decorating the corridor. The panoramic windows offered a breathtaking view of the city's skyline, a daily reminder of the empire I had quietly constructed, while my in-laws were busy analyzing my discount rack dresses. My executive assistant, a sharply dressed and relentlessly efficient woman named Sarah, fell into step beside me the moment I crossed the threshold. She carried a sleek leather portfolio and a steaming cup of my preferred dark roast coffee. "Good morning, Clara," Sarah said, handing me the coffee without missing a beat. "I have the updated quarterly yield reports from the commercial sector, and the residential eviction filings you requested last night have already been processed and expedited. The sheriff's department will execute the order at the suburban townhouse by tomorrow morning." "Excellent work, Sarah," I replied, taking a sip of the coffee. "Ensure that the locksmiths are scheduled to arrive precisely 10 minutes after the sheriff vacates the premises. I want new deadbolts on every door before noon." "Consider it done," she said, navigating her tablet. "However, there is one urgent matter requiring your immediate signature." She opened the leather portfolio and extracted a thick red tab dossier, placing it on my expansive glass desk as we entered my corner office. I took my seat in the ergonomic leather chair, gesturing for her to continue. "Madam, it concerns the prime retail space we acquired last year in the downtown shopping district." Sarah explained, her tone strictly professional. "The current tenant, Rachel's boutique, is severely delinquent. She is requesting a third rent extension. Her legal counsel submitted a hardship petition this morning, claiming temporary cash flow issues due to supply chain disruptions." I stared down at the crisp white document resting on my desk. The logo at the top, a cursive, ostentatious monogram, belonged to my sister-in-law, Rachel, the same woman who had gleefully called me just a few hours ago to gloat about my impending homelessness. The irony was so potent it practically hummed in the air. I picked up the hardship petition, scanning the desperate pleading language crafted by her attorneys. Rachel was begging for 60 more days. She was drowning in overhead costs, failing to move inventory, and completely oblivious to the fact that her landlord was the very woman she had tormented for years. A vivid memory flashed in my mind, pulling me back to last Thanksgiving at Patricia's house. Rachel had cornered me in the kitchen while I was washing the crystal wine glasses she refused to clean. She had been wearing a designer dress she undoubtedly expensed to this failing boutique, swirling a mimosa, and looking at me with pure disdain. "I just do not understand how you tolerate such a tiny, insignificant life," Clara Rachel had sneered, leaning against the marble counter. "You spend all your time on that little furniture-moving hobby of yours. What do you even call it, home staging?" "It is so quaint. I suppose it gives you something to do while Travis handles the real money. You really should visit my boutique sometime. I could give you a pity discount on something that actually fits properly. You look like you buy your clothes by the pound." She had laughed that high, grating laugh, entirely convinced of her own superiority. She had flaunted her retail business as the ultimate symbol of female empowerment, using it as a bludgeon to make me feel small. She had mocked my home staging business, entirely unaware that my little hobby had rapidly evolved into a massive commercial real estate firm that routinely bought and sold properties worth more than her entire life's earnings. I had purchased the historic brick building housing her boutique 6 months ago through one of my anonymous shell companies, absorbing her lease in the process. She had been paying rent to me, and now she could not even manage that. Sarah stood quietly waiting for my directive. "The financial analysis attached to the petition shows her business is effectively insolvent," Sarah noted, misinterpreting my silence as hesitation. "Her foot traffic is non-existent, and she has defaulted on 2 vendor shipments this month." Standard procedure dictates we deny the third extension and initiate lockout protocols to protect our collateral. But given the specific name on the lease, I wanted your explicit authorization. Sarah knew my history. She knew exactly who Rachel was. I leaned back in my chair looking out at the city below. Rachel had spent years participating in my emotional execution. She had cheered when Patricia voted to ban me. She had laughed when Travis threatened to take my daughter. She operated under the delusion that wealth and status gave her immunity from consequences. She believed she was an untouchable elite looking down on the working-class trash. It was time to introduce her to reality. I reached across the desk and picked up a heavy gold-plated fountain pen. The cool metal felt grounding against my skin. I did not feel pity. I did not feel guilt. I felt the absolute unwavering certainty of a ledger finally being balanced. I brought the pen to the paper. With one swift, deliberate motion, I drew a thick black line straight through the formal request for a rent extension. I flipped to the final page of the dossier, the authorization for immediate commercial eviction, and signed my name with precise, elegant strokes. I closed the folder and pushed it away. Request denied, I told her. Send the padlock notice. I pushed the signed eviction order across the polished glass desk toward Sarah. She nodded, sliding it smoothly into her leather portfolio before turning on her heel to execute the command. The heavy oak door of my office clicked shut, leaving me alone with the panoramic view of the Chicago skyline. The satisfaction of shutting down the delusional boutique of Rachel was a quiet, potent thrill, but the day was far from over. My phone buzzed against the glass surface, disrupting the silence. I picked it up. A new message from Jamal illuminated the screen. It was an image file, heavy and high resolution, taking a second to render. When the picture cleared, I let out a soft, incredulous laugh. Jamal and Travis were standing in front of a luxury car dealership, both wearing designer sunglasses and smug grins. They were leaning aggressively against the hood of a brand-new slate-gray Porsche 911. Travis had one hand resting on the gleaming metal, looking like a man who had just conquered the financial world, rather than a man whose wife had just cut off his life support. Below the photograph, Jamal had typed a caption dripping with unearned arrogance. "Big boss moves. Have fun on the city bus, Clara." The sheer predictability of their behavior was astounding. Travis, reeling from the realization that his joint account was overdrawn, immediately sought validation through a massive impulsive purchase. He needed to prove to himself and to Jamal that he was still the wealthy patriarch, still the man in charge. He was bleeding from a severed financial artery, and his response was to buy a $150,000 sports car. I tapped the screen, zooming in on the dealership sign in the background. It was a high-end exotic auto broker, exactly the kind of place that catered to men with more ego than liquid cash. I set the phone down and pulled my keyboard closer. Jamal was a luxury car broker himself, specializing in predatory leases for clients with questionable credit. I knew exactly how he operated. He preyed on people obsessed with maintaining an image they could not afford. But the personal credit of Travis was currently locked down and spiraling thanks to the frozen joint accounts and the missed mortgage payments. There was absolutely no way a reputable dealership would clear Travis for a $150,000 liability based on his personal Social Security number. I opened a new tab on my secure terminal and accessed the commercial intelligence database Lumina Holdings maintained for vetting potential acquisitions. I typed in the name of the primary business entity of Travis Vanguard Crypto Strategies. The search results populated instantly. I scanned the recent corporate filings and credit inquiries. There it was, a massive, newly registered liability flagged just an hour ago. Jamal had bypassed the standard consumer credit checks entirely. He had structured the transaction as a corporate lease using Vanguard Crypto Strategies as the primary financial guarantor for the Porsche. Travis had staked his entire company on a sports car. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glowing data. The irony was almost physically suffocating. For the past 2 years, Travis had strutted around the country club dinners of Patricia loudly boasting about the massive valuations and explosive growth of Vanguard. He loved to tell anyone who would listen that traditional finance was dead and his decentralized trading algorithms were printing money. Whenever I tried to ask basic questions about cash flow or operating expenses, he would wave his hand dismissively, telling me my project manager brain simply could not comprehend high-level technological finance. He insisted his company was a fortress. The truth, which I was looking at right now, was that Vanguard Crypto Strategies was an absolute house of cards. His algorithms were garbage. The company was hemorrhaging cash, surviving month to month, solely because it was anchored to a larger umbrella fund that continually injected liquidity to keep it solvent. Travis thought he was a self-made genius. He never bothered to look into who actually owned that umbrella fund. I picked up my desk phone and dialed a private unlisted number. It rang exactly once before a sharp professional voice answered. "Good afternoon," Clara Marcus said. My wealth manager never engaged in small talk. He was the architect of my shadow portfolio, a man who executed complex financial maneuvers with surgical precision. "Good afternoon, Marcus," I replied, keeping my eyes on the corporate filing displaying the new luxury lease of Travis. "I need you to initiate an immediate capital recall on the Vanguard Umbrella Fund." There was a brief pause on the line. The sound of rapid typing echoed faintly. "Clara, you are the primary liquidity provider for that entire ecosystem through your Silent Angel investment block. A total withdrawal will instantly collapse their operating capital. Margin calls will trigger across their entire board by the end of the trading day. Vanguard will be technically insolvent by tomorrow morning, I am aware," I stated. "They will not be able to cover their outstanding liabilities," Marcus continued, ensuring I understood the gravity of the command. "Any corporate leases or vendor agreements tied to that entity will immediately default. Send the withdrawal order, Marcus. Pull every single dollar out right now." "Understood. Executing now." I placed the receiver gently back on its cradle. The dominoes were no longer just tipped. They were actively crashing into one another. Travis and Jamal were currently driving around the city in a $150,000 Porsche blasting music, completely convinced they were the kings of Chicago. They had no idea that the company guaranteeing that vehicle was bleeding to death. When the dealership received the automated alert tomorrow morning that the guarantor accounts were frozen due to insolvency, the repossession order would be swift and brutal. Jamal will be completely torched, and Travis will be left standing in the ashes. Excellent. Rachel stepped out of her rideshare and adjusted her expensive designer sunglasses. The morning air was crisp, but her mood was already incredibly sour. Her barista had gotten her order wrong, and her supplier was demanding upfront payment. She marched toward the glass doors of her storefront, ready to unleash her frustration on her employee. Her perfectly manicured hand stopped midair. Taped directly at eye level on the glass was a bright yellow piece of paper. Rachel ripped it down, tearing the corners. The bold letters screamed, "3-day notice to pay rent or quit." Rachel scoffed. She scanned the document until she found the name of the property management company, Lumina Holdings, LLC. She rolled her eyes, crushing the notice. This was obviously a clerical error. Lumina Holdings was a massive, faceless corporate conglomerate. They likely had an automated system that generated these notices the second a tenant fell behind. She had submitted a hardship petition yesterday. A piece of yellow paper was not going to shut down her boutique. She pushed through the door. Her assistant Chloe looked up from the cash register with nervous eyes. "Did you see that trash?" Rachel snapped, tossing her bag. "I saw it when I opened the store," Chloe stammered. "It is a computer glitch," Rachel said. "Corporate landlords are entirely incompetent." Despite her confidence, anxiety tightened in her stomach. She did not actually have the capital to cover the back rent. Her credit cards were completely maxed out. She needed cash to keep the vendors from cutting off her supply lines. Rachel pulled out her phone and navigated to her favorite contact. Travis would know how to handle this. He was a financial genius, dealing in millions of decentralized currency every single day. A few $1,000s was pocket change. Travis answered on the second ring. The roar of a high-performance engine echoed. "Travis, what is that noise?" Rachel asked. "That is the sound of a $150,000 German-engineered masterpiece, Rachel," Travis yelled over the engine noise. "I just picked up the new Porsche. I am demonstrating to Jamal what real wealth looks like." Rachel smiled. "That is amazing. Mom is going to be thrilled. And I am so glad you dumped Clara. She would have made you buy a minivan." "Do not even mention that parasite to me," Travis sneered. "She is history. I am evicting her from the townhouse by Friday. What is going on with you? You never call before noon unless it is an emergency." "It is not an emergency," Rachel said. "It is an annoyance. My commercial landlord Lumina Holdings sent an automated eviction notice this morning. They are demanding 3 months of back rent within 72 hours. They are threatening to padlock the doors. I cannot have my clients seeing a padlock. It would ruin my brand image." Travis laughed. "These corporate property managers try to bully small business owners. You need to show them you are not intimidated." "I know, but they want $20,000 to clear the ledger." "Say no more," Travis interrupted smoothly. "I will handle it. I just closed a massive staking pool position on Vanguard Crypto Strategies. We are swimming in liquidity right now. I will wire you $20,000 the second I get back to my desk. You can throw the cash right in their face." "Oh, Travis, you are an absolute lifesaver," Rachel gushed. "You are the best brother in the world." "Just keep making the family look good," Travis replied. "I will send the confirmation number in 20 minutes. Travis ended the call. He felt totally invincible. He had the car, he had the status, and he had just proven his immense financial superiority to his sister. He pulled the Porsche into the private parking garage beneath his downtown office building. He tossed the keys to the valet with a $50 bill and strutted toward the elevator. He walked into the sleek office of Vanguard Crypto Strategies. The room was oddly quiet. His 2 junior analysts were huddled around a single monitor, their faces pale. Travis ignored them entirely, walking straight into his corner office. He needed to quickly initiate the wire transfer to Rachel and complete the down payment for the brand-new luxury condo. Travis sat down in his leather chair and cracked his knuckles. He opened his encrypted laptop and navigated to his administrative trading portal. He entered his master credentials, ready to access the millions of dollars in capital he believed he controlled. The screen loaded. Travis froze. The breath hitched in his throat. There were no charts. There were no trading pairs. There were no account balances. Instead, the entire monitor was consumed by a glaring blood-red banner. "Account frozen. Pending SEC, fraud investigation and total liquidity recall." Travis stared at the screen, his mind completely incapable of processing the words. He furiously clicked his mouse, refreshing the page. The red banner remained. He tried to access the secondary offshore accounts. Blocked. He tried to access the corporate operating fund. Locked. The massive umbrella fund that silently anchored his entire operation had vanished, pulled out completely and without warning. The dominoes Clara had tipped earlier that morning had finally reached the end of the line. The withdrawal of her angel investment had triggered an automatic liquidity crisis. The algorithmic trading bots, suddenly starved of capital, had triggered massive margin calls. Vanguard Crypto Strategies was not just broke, it was functionally completely bankrupt. And the sudden catastrophic evaporation of funds had tripped the automated red flags at the Securities and Exchange Commission. Travis grabbed his desk phone, his hands trembling violently. He dialed his primary banking liaison, but the automated voice message informed him the number was no longer in service. He was entirely locked out of his own life. The brand new Porsche, sitting in the garage, the new luxury condo, the wire transfer to his sister, it was all gone. While Travis sat paralyzed in his glass office, completely isolated from his non-existent funds, Patricia was busy broadcasting her manufactured reality to the world. She stood in the center of the exclusive Oakwood Country Club ballroom, flanked by event coordinators and florists. Her social media live stream was a masterclass in performative wealth. She spun in a slow circle, showcasing the draped silk ceilings and the towering centerpieces of imported white orchids. She wore a tailored linen suit that screamed old money, her face heavily filtered through the application lens. "We are finalizing the aesthetic for the Ruby Anniversary Gala," Patricia announced to her followers, her voice carrying that manufactured breathless excitement she reserved exclusively for an audience. 40 years of the Blackwell legacy, only the absolute best for my family. She flipped the camera to show a velvet-lined tray of crystal stemware, dismissing a nervous catering manager with a sharp wave of her manicured hand. "I am just so incredibly blessed," she continued, bringing the camera back to her face. "I have my beautiful daughter Rachel, who is revolutionizing downtown retail. I have my brilliant son Travis closing massive tech deals before lunch. And of course, Jamal, who is practically family, keeping my boys in the finest luxury imports. This is my inner circle. This is what true success looks like." She tagged all three of them in the broadcast, stamping the video with a gold crown emoji. She spoke of legacy, of unshakable foundations, and of the superiority of their bloodline. She went on a subtle tangent, remarking on how the family was shedding dead weight, a clear, venomous reference to my impending departure. She was blissfully unaware that the very foundation she was bragging about had already turned to dust. She did not know that Rachel was currently staring at a 3-day pay or quit notice, terrified of a padlock. She did not know that Travis was staring at a federal fraud banner, locked out of his own life. Patricia was entirely consumed by the illusion, polishing the brass on a sinking ship. Miles away from the country club, far removed from the suffocating pretense of the Blackwell family, I was experiencing a completely different reality. The afternoon sun washed over the sprawling green expanse of Centennial Park. A gentle spring breeze rustled the leaves of the massive oak trees lining the playground. I stood behind a bright red bucket swing, gently pushing Lily higher into the air. "Higher, Mommy!" Lily squealed, her tiny hands gripping the chains, her face tilted up toward the clear blue sky. "Hold on tight," I said, giving her another push. I wore comfortable jeans and a simple cotton sweater. My hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail. There were no designer labels, no filters, and no audience. There was just the warm sun on my skin and the melodic sound of my daughter laughing. For 10 years, my life had been dictated by the demands and criticisms of Travis and his mother. I had spent a decade shrinking myself, biting my tongue, and managing their fragile egos while secretly building my own fortress. Now the heavy armor of that submissive wife persona was gone. I felt incredibly light. My phone sat inside my canvas tote bag on a nearby bench. It was set to completely silent. I knew exactly what was happening in the digital ether. I knew that the automated alerts of Lumina Holdings were triggering. I knew that the margin calls were detonating across the fraudulent trading accounts of Travis. I knew that Rachel was frantically trying to secure a wire transfer that would never arrive. My screen was likely lighting up with missed calls, panicked texts, and desperate demands. I did not check it. I did not care. The trap was set. The mechanisms were automated, and the outcome was mathematically certain. I did not need to monitor their destruction. I just needed to push my daughter on the swing. The contrast was absolute. Travis was suffocating in a high-rise office, crushed by the weight of his own lies. Patricia was pacing a ballroom, desperate for the envy of strangers. I was simply breathing the fresh air, entirely secure in the quiet power of actual liquid capital. True wealth did not need an audience. True wealth was the freedom to turn off your phone on a Tuesday afternoon and listen to the birds sing. The afternoon slowly melted into evening. The sun dipped below the city skyline, casting long, dramatic shadows across the pavement. The digital clocks on every device, every server, and every wall steadily marched forward. The 72-hour window was closing. The grace period for the eviction notice at the boutique was ticking down. The legal response window for the frozen crypto assets was expiring. The repossession mandate for the fraudulently leased Porsche was activating. There was no stopping the machinery now. The legal protocols I had established through my wealth manager and my corporate attorneys operated with cold, unfeeling efficiency. They did not care about the Ruby anniversary. They did not care about the social standing of Patricia. They only recognized the absolute letter of the law. The hours fell away. 48 hours, 24 hours, 12 hours. The sun rose on a crisp Friday morning. It was exactly 8 in the bright morning. The 72-hour mark struck with the finality of a judge bringing down a heavy wooden gavel. The screen of my tablet faded to black, displaying only a stark white countdown timer, hitting 0. Across the city in 3 distinct locations, the consequences of their unbridled arrogance arrived simultaneously. At the suburban townhouse, a heavy fist pounded on the front door, followed by the sharp, demanding ring of the doorbell. At the downtown boutique, a uniformed officer pressed the buzzer, a thick steel padlock hanging heavily from his leather utility belt. And at the luxury dealership, 2 federal agents firmly pressed the intercom. The doorbell echoed through Patricia's townhouse foyer. Her phone buzzed with likes from country club wives. She smoothed her suit, expecting the caterer with the tasting menu for her Ruby anniversary gala. She opened the door with a radiant smile. The smile vanished instantly. Instead of a caterer, 2 sheriffs stood on her welcome mat. Flanking them was a man holding a thick stack of documents. The visual of law enforcement on her porch was jarring. Patricia blinked. She gripped the doorframe, her knuckles turning white. "Good morning, ma'am," the sheriff said, his tone devoid of the deference Patricia believed she was owed. "Are you Patricia Blackwell?" "I am Patricia Blackwell," she replied with supreme indignation. "What is the meaning of this outrage? Why are armed officers standing on my property? You are disturbing the peace of this exclusive neighborhood." The man in the gray suit stepped forward. He did not look intimidated by her designer clothes or the crystal chandelier sparkling in the grand foyer. He extended the documents. "Patricia Blackwell, you are hereby served," the process server stated clearly. "These are formal foreclosure and immediate eviction proceedings for this property. You have exactly 24 hours to vacate before law enforcement removes you and your belongings from the estate." Patricia stared at the paperwork as if it were a snake. She did not reach out to take it. The process server let the heavy stack drop onto the welcome mat. The loud sound of paper hitting the tile echoed like a gunshot. "Have you lost your mind?" Patricia shrieked, her high society persona shattering instantly. "This is a monumental mistake. You have the wrong house. You have the wrong family. We do not get evicted. We are the Blackwells. Do you know who I am? I am hosting my Ruby anniversary gala at the Oakwood Country Club next week. The documents are filed with the county clerk, ma'am," the sheriff said, unfazed by her outburst. "The property is currently in default. The legal grace period has expired." Patricia felt panic rise in her chest, but her towering ego quickly suppressed it. She kicked the papers away with her leather pump. "This is a clerical error," she yelled, her voice echoing. "A private investment fund bought our mortgage 2 years ago. We are in perfect standing. My son Travis manages millions. We are high society. We do not default on anything. Get off my property before I call the chief of police. I play tennis with his wife. I will have your badges for this harassment." She was breathing heavily, her chest heaving. She looked wildly up and down the street, terrified her neighbors might be watching this humiliating spectacle. She pointed a trembling finger at the process server. "You are going to be sued for this," she threatened, her voice shrill. "That fund specifically restructured our debt to ensure our estate remained untouched. We have an ironclad agreement. You are looking at a lawsuit that will bankrupt whatever agency you work for. Get off my porch right now." The sheriffs did not move. The process server did not flinch. Patricia felt an icy dread creeping into her veins. Her screaming usually produced compliance. Service workers apologized, managers offered discounts, subordinates cowered. But these men looked at her with clinical detachment. They looked at her exactly the way she looked at waitstaff at her country club. "Ma'am," the sheriff repeated, his voice unyielding. "The paperwork is legally binding. The foreclosure is finalized. The private investment fund holding your mortgage initiated the total recall of the debt this morning. The default was triggered instantly due to cross-collateral liabilities tied to Vanguard crypto strategies." Patricia froze completely. The mention of her son's company name was like a bucket of ice water poured over her head. Travis had assured her Vanguard was a financial fortress. He guaranteed her that utilizing their home as collateral was merely a temporary risk-free formality. He swore the private investment fund holding their mortgage was a passive entity that only cared about interest payments. "That is impossible!" Patricia gasped, dropping to a panicked whisper. "Travis handles all of that. He is a financial genius. The fund would never recall the debt without negotiating first. We are VIP clients." There was a suffocating silence on the porch. The spring breeze suddenly felt freezing. A fourth figure stepped out from the vehicles parked at the curb. He walked slowly up the cobblestone driveway. He was an older man in a navy suit carrying a briefcase. The sheriff stepped aside to let him pass. He stopped, looking up at Patricia. She recognized him instantly. It was Marcus, the wealth manager who accompanied Clara to family dinners. Patricia had always dismissed him as a glorified accountant. Marcus did not smile. He reached into his briefcase and extracted a single crisp piece of white paper. "Good morning, Patricia," Marcus said, his voice smooth and lethally professional. "I am the lead attorney representing Lumina Holdings, the private investment fund that owns the debt on this property." Patricia stared at him, her mind spinning. Lumina Holdings. That was the same corporate entity that owned the commercial lease for Rachel's boutique. "What are you doing here, Marcus?" she demanded. "Why are you involved in this?" "Travis will have your job for stepping over him." Marcus ignored her threat entirely. He held up the single piece of paper, turning it so Patricia could clearly see the black ink. "I am not here to negotiate," Patricia Marcus stated coldly. "I am here to execute the final directive of the primary shareholder and sole proprietor of Lumina Holdings." Patricia squinted at the document. Her eyes scanned the legal jargon until they locked onto the final authorizing signature at the very bottom of the page. The breath left her lungs in a sharp, sudden, agonizing rush. Her knees buckled and she grabbed the doorframe to keep from collapsing. The signature, bold and uncompromising, belonged entirely to Clara. Patricia stared at the signature at the bottom of the legal document. The letters were perfectly formed, stamped across the line. Clara. The name seemed to vibrate on the page, mocking her. Her brain immediately began to short-circuit, desperately searching for a rational explanation. It had to be a different Clara. It had to be an administrative mistake. There was absolutely no way her meek project manager daughter-in-law had any connection to a multinational private investment fund. Patricia looked up from the paper, her breathing shallow and erratic. She stared at Marcus, waiting for him to deliver the punchline to this sick, twisted joke. Marcus did not smile. He simply stood there, perfectly composed, radiating the quiet authority of a man who held all the cards. He looked Patricia up and down, his gaze sweeping over her tailored linen suit, her diamond tennis bracelet, and her coiffed hair. It was an appraising look, clinical and entirely devoid of respect. It was the look a bank auditor gives a depreciating asset. He adjusted his grip on his leather briefcase and took a single step closer to the immaculate front porch. The uniformed sheriffs remained completely silent, forming a formidable wall of blue behind him. The morning sun beat down on the cobblestone driveway, but Patricia felt incredibly cold. Her manicured fingers trembled as she held the eviction notice. She tried to speak, to demand answers, to assert her dominance, but her throat was completely dry. The reality of the situation was violently crashing through her carefully constructed walls of denial. She was standing on the precipice of total social and financial ruin, and the man holding the sledgehammer was Clara's wealth manager. Marcus cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the heavy silence with surgical precision. "Lumina Holdings bought your bad debt to save you from bankruptcy 2 years ago, Patricia." He spoke slowly, ensuring every single word penetrated her shock. "Your son Travis had leveraged this estate to the absolute breaking point. He had hidden the delinquency from you. The bank was 72 hours away from initiating a public foreclosure auction." Clara discovered the discrepancy. She stepped in, utilizing Lumina Holdings as a corporate shield to purchase the debt outright. She paid the arrears, she stabilized the asset, she quietly saved your family from absolute public humiliation. Patricia stood frozen, Travis had lied to her. He had not restructured their debt through a brilliant financial maneuver. He had bankrupted them and Clara had bailed them out. Clara had been paying for the roof over their heads for 24 months. Marcus watched the color drain from the face of the older woman. He continued, his tone dropping an octave, becoming even more absolute. Clara structured the arrangement to remain strictly anonymous. She wanted to preserve the pride of your family. She instructed me to maintain the mortgage at a subsidized interest rate, asking nothing in return but basic respect. However, Marcus paused, his eyes narrowing slightly as he looked directly into the terrified eyes of Patricia. The chief executive officer of Lumina Holdings has recently reevaluated her investment portfolio. She has decided not to extend financial mercy to individuals who actively ban her from family events. Patricia completely stopped breathing. Her chest seized. The dots connected in her mind with terrifying, blinding clarity. Clara was not just an angel investor. Clara was the chief executive officer of Lumina Holdings. The quiet, unassuming woman who drove a sensible sedan and wore practical shoes was a corporate titan. The sheer magnitude of the deception, the absolute scale of Clara's hidden power was staggering. Patricia looked wildly around her beautiful property. She looked at the imported Italian marble columns framing the entryway. She looked at the manicured rose bushes she proudly showed off to the country club wives. None of it belonged to her. The house she used to flaunt her immense wealth, the very estate she used to validate her elite social status, legally belonged to the daughter-in-law she despised. Every dinner party she had hosted, every holiday gathering where she had belittled Clara, she had been doing it inside Clara's house. She had served Clara cheap wine while sitting under a chandelier that Clara technically owned. The humiliation was absolute, burning through her veins like acid. She had spent a decade treating Clara like a peasant, completely unaware that she was actually a tenant, living entirely by Clara's grace. Her entire reality was a fabricated illusion, a paper-thin stage set, propped up by the charity of a woman she deemed unworthy of the Blackwell name. Patricia opened her mouth, a desperate, strangled sound escaping her throat. She wanted to scream. Before Patricia could form a single coherent word, a violent screeching sound shattered the quiet morning air. The piercing noise of burning rubber echoed down the exclusive tree-lined street. Everyone on the porch turned their heads toward the source of the commotion. A sports car careened around the corner. It was a brand-new Porsche 911. The vehicle wildly swerved into the cobblestone driveway of the estate, the tires smoking as they aggressively gripped the pavement. The sports car jerked to a violent halt just inches behind the parked vehicles of the sheriff deputies. The heavy engine roared loudly before abruptly cutting off. The driver's side door flew open with aggressive force. Jamal jumped out of the driver's seat. He was no longer wearing the smug, arrogant grin he had displayed in the photograph sent to Clara earlier that morning. His designer sunglasses were gone. His pristine suit jacket was crumpled. Jamal looked utterly panicked, his eyes wide and frantic as he stared at the uniformed officers standing on the porch. He looked at Patricia, then back to the sheriffs, his chest heaving. The invincible facade of the luxury car broker had completely vanished, replaced by the sheer terror of a man who realized his entire fraudulent world was collapsing. Jamal slammed the heavy car door. He sprinted up the cobblestone pathway, bypassing the armed sheriffs, the process server, and Marcus. His frantic eyes locked on Patricia. She was clutching the eviction notice, her face pale, but Jamal ignored her distress entirely, consumed by his catastrophic emergency. "Patricia, where is Travis?" Jamal demanded, his voice cracking. "I have been calling him for 20 minutes and it goes straight to voicemail." Patricia blinked, struggling to switch her focus to Jamal. "What are you talking about?" "Travis is at his office managing his fund." "There is no fund," Jamal screamed, throwing his hands up in despair. "The Vanguard Crypto Strategies operating account is frozen. Secondary accounts are locked. My dealership received a critical failure alert. Travis tried wiring $20,000 to Rachel, triggering a massive fraud protocol. He has zero liquidity. He is completely locked out." Patricia shook her head. "That is impossible. Travis is a millionaire. He just bought that car you are driving. You are making a mistake. I am not making a mistake, Jamal yelled, shoving his phone toward her face. Look, the primary umbrella fund backing his entire operation recalled every single cent this morning. Vanguard is legally, undeniably bankrupt. Travis has been playing with ghost money. Before Patricia could process that her son was broke, a loud grinding rumble interrupted them. A heavy-duty flatbed tow truck swung onto the street. The driver threw the massive vehicle into reverse. It backed aggressively into the driveway, its warning beeper echoing loudly. The steel ramp lowered with a crash, stopping mere inches from the bumper of the slate-gray Porsche. Two men in fluorescent vests jumped out carrying thick steel chains and a yellow clipboard. They ignored the sheriffs, Marcus and Patricia, marching directly toward the luxury sports car. "Hey, what are you doing?" Jamal shouted, running down the steps to block the vehicle. "Get away from that car! You are trespassing!" The lead repo man barely glanced at Jamal. He checked the vehicle identification number against the paperwork on his clipboard. He nodded to his partner, who immediately knelt and began threading the heavy steel chains through the front alloy wheels of the Porsche. "I said back off," Jamal screamed, reaching a hysterical pitch. "I am a licensed luxury broker. This vehicle was secured this morning under a corporate lease agreement. You have absolutely no right to touch it." The repo man handed Jamal a copy of the yellow work order. "The corporate lease agreement you filed this morning listed Vanguard Crypto Strategies as the primary financial guarantor," the man stated efficiently. "10 minutes ago, our dealership software received an automated federal notification that the guarantor entity is officially insolvent. The accounts are frozen due to a massive liquidity recall. Section 4 of your lease states that corporate insolvency triggers an immediate non-negotiable repossession clause." Jamal stared at the paper, his hands shaking. "No, you do not understand. The financing is solid. I just need to get Travis on the phone. Give me 20 minutes. "You have 0 minutes, the man replied. The winch engaged with a loud mechanical whine. The thick steel cables pulled tight, dragging the $150,000 German masterpiece up the steep metal incline of the flatbed. The tires screeched in protest, leaving black rubber streaks across the pristine cobblestone driveway. Jamal watched in absolute horror. He had built his entire personal brand on projecting an image of untouchable wealth and elite connections. He had strutted around the dealership, loudly bragging about securing this exclusive vehicle for a high-net-worth client. Now that same vehicle was being publicly repossessed in the middle of a wealthy neighborhood, right in front of law enforcement officers. His professional reputation was incinerated in real time. The flatbed truck secured the Porsche and slowly rumbled out of the driveway, taking the last shred of Jamal's dignity away with it. He stood on the pavement, breathing heavily, his hands clenched into tight fists. The luxurious facade he had carefully cultivated over the past 5 years shattered completely. He turned around, his eyes locking onto Patricia, who was still standing paralyzed on the porch next to Marcus and the sheriffs. Jamal marched back up the steps, his face twisted in pure, unadulterated rage. He pointed an aggressive, trembling finger directly at Patricia. "Your son is a fraud," Jamal screamed, making Patricia physically flinch. "He is a broke, lying, pathetic fraud. He staked his entire company on a car lease because he needed to look like a winner. He is playing with monopoly money, and he just dragged my entire professional career down with him." "Do not you dare speak about my son that way!" Patricia shrieked, her own temper violently erupting. "Travis is a genius. You are just a glorified used car salesman. You should be grateful he even associated with you. If there is a problem with the financing, it is because you filed the paperwork incorrectly." "I filed exactly what he gave me," Jamal roared, stepping closer, completely ignoring the sheriffs, who were now resting their hands near their utility belts. "He gave me a dead company, Patricia. He gave me worthless equity. He is nothing but a cheap con artist hiding behind your fake high society image. And you are just as pathetic as he is. Look at you. You are getting publicly evicted. You do not even own this house." The flawless elite alliance they had projected for years instantly disintegrated. The pristine front lawn of the Blackwell estate transformed into a vulgar, humiliating arena. Patricia screamed insults, her face red, her tailored suit forgotten, as she hurled profanities at the man she had just called her inner circle. Jamal screamed back, cursing Travis, cursing Patricia, and cursing the day he ever met them. They were two desperate people, stripped of their fake wealth, tearing each other apart, while Marcus and the officers stood silently watching the entire empire burn down. The vicious screaming match on the manicured front lawn was suddenly drowned out by the rattling exhaust of a battered Toyota sedan. The rideshare vehicle jerked to a halt, right behind the sheriff cruisers, its faded paint sharply contrasting with the affluent surroundings. The rear passenger door swung open before the car fully stopped. Rachel stumbled out onto the pavement. Her normally flawless appearance was completely decimated. Heavy black streaks of waterproof mascara ran down her cheeks, staining her silk blouse. She was clutching a cardboard box filled with desk trinkets, her hands shaking violently. Patricia stopped mid-insult, staring at her daughter in absolute shock. Rachel never took public transit, and she certainly never appeared in public looking like a deranged vagrant. "Mom," Rachel wailed, her voice cracking as she practically crawled up the driveway. "They locked me out. They put a chain around the glass doors." Patricia abandoned her fight with Jamal, rushing toward her daughter. "Who locked you out? What are you talking about?" "The police," Rachel sobbed, dropping the cardboard box onto the grass. Office supplies and framed photos spilled everywhere. An officer showed up with a padlock. They seized my entire inventory. Every single piece of designer clothing, the jewelry, the imported fixtures. They took it all. Jamal crossed his arms, his anger momentarily replaced by cruel amusement. "Looks like the Blackwell Empire is crumbling on all fronts today. Did Travis forget to pay your bills too?" "Shut up, Jamal," Patricia hissed, wrapping an arm around her hysterical daughter. "Rachel, breathe. Who ordered the seizure? We can call our lawyers. We can fix this." Rachel shook her head wildly, gasping for air. "We cannot fix this." The commercial landlord executed an immediate asset seizure clause due to a breach of contract. They claimed the corporate backing was fraudulent. I begged the building manager for an extension, but he said the order came directly from the parent company. He said Lumina Holdings demanded the immediate liquidation of the storefront. The name hit the air like a physical shockwave. Jamal froze, his mocking smile vanishing instantly. Patricia physically recoiled, letting go of Rachel's shoulder as if she had been burned. "What did you just say?" Jamal demanded, stepping dangerously close to Rachel. "What company, Lumina Holdings?" Rachel cried, shrinking back from his aggressive posture. "The private equity firm that bought the commercial building last year. They hold the lease." Patricia turned slowly to look at Marcus, who was still standing quietly on the porch, observing the escalating chaos with the cold, detached gaze of an executioner. Her mind, previously clouded by panic and rage, suddenly achieved a terrifying state of absolute clarity. The scattered pieces of the puzzle slammed together, forming a picture so horrifying it made her physically nauseous. "Lumina Holdings," Patricia whispered, her voice trembling. "Marcus just told me Lumina Holdings bought the debt on this house 2 years ago." Jamal's eyes widened to the size of saucers. He looked from Patricia to Rachel, the blood draining completely from his face. "The primary umbrella fund," Jamal stammered, his voice dropping to a horrified whisper. "The silent backer that injected $10 million into Vanguard crypto strategies to keep Travis afloat last year. I saw the transfer documents. The capital came from Lumina Holdings." A suffocating dead silence fell over the three of them. The sheriffs shifted their weight, completely ignored by the spiraling family. The warm morning sun offered absolutely no comfort as the sheer scale of the manipulation settled over them. They stood in a jagged circle on the dying grass, staring at each other in mounting terror. Clara. Patricia breathed the name, feeling like poison on her tongue. Rachel stopped crying, wiping her stained cheeks. "What about Clara? What does she have to do with my boutique?" Jamal let out a humorless, breathless laugh, running his hands over his shaved head. "She is Lumina. Clara is Lumina Holdings." Rachel stared at him blankly. "That is impossible. Clara is a nobody. She works a boring corporate job. She drives a Honda. She wears terrible shoes." "She owns your boutique," Patricia said, her voice hollow, devoid of its usual arrogant command. "She owns this estate. She funded your brother's fraudulent company. She is the chief executive officer of the very fund that is systematically destroying us right now. The realization was an agonizing physical blow. They had spent years relentlessly mocking Clara. They had excluded her from family vacations, belittled her career, insulted her wardrobe, and treated her like an embarrassing stain on the Blackwell legacy. All the while, Clara had been quietly buying their debt. She had literally purchased the ground they walked on, the walls they slept inside, and the businesses they used to project their elite superiority. She had willingly financed their delusions of grandeur, building a flawless, invisible cage around them. And today, because they had arrogantly banned her from a meaningless anniversary gala, she had simply decided to lock the cage and throw away the key. They were entirely at her mercy, and she had none left to give. Patricia looked at her beautiful home, knowing she would be sleeping in a hotel tonight. Rachel looked at her spilled box, knowing her glamorous career as a boutique owner was permanently over. Jamal looked at the empty space where his sports car had been, knowing his reputation in the luxury market was absolutely pulverized. They were entirely, utterly owned. The silence of their collective ruin was violently broken by the high, whining engine of an approaching vehicle. A faded blue compact rental car slowly turned into the driveway, parking directly behind the sheriff cruisers. The driver's side door opened with a squeak. Travis stepped out, accompanied by his young, heavily Botoxed mistress. He marched toward the house, aggressively ignoring the police and the scattered foreclosure documents. His eyes blazed with frantic energy. "What did you do?" Travis roared, practically vibrating with rage. "What did you people do to provoke my wife?" The chaotic spectacle on the manicured lawn of the estate quickly dissolved into a desperate, unified mission of blind rage. The absolute destruction of their individual realities forged a temporary, venomous alliance. Patricia Travis, his heavily Botoxed mistress Rachel, and Jamal piled into the cramped, foul-smelling interior of Travis's cheap rental sedan. The drive downtown was filled with screaming accusations and frantic phone calls to disconnected numbers. They refused to accept the reality that had just violently upended their lives. In their minds, Clara was still the submissive, invisible project manager they had tormented for a decade. They convinced themselves this was merely an elaborate, illegal stunt. They arrived at the towering glass and steel skyscraper of luminous spaces, looking like a band of deranged trespassers. They furiously stormed through the revolving doors and into the sprawling, immaculate lobby. The space was a monument to corporate power, featuring soaring ceilings, polished marble floors, and silent, efficient security personnel. Patricia marched directly toward the vast reception desk, her ruined linen suit practically vibrating with indignation. Rachel trailed behind her, clutching her smeared, tear-stained face. Jamal aggressively paced the lobby floor while Travis and his mistress presented a unified front of manufactured bravado. "We demand to see Clara immediately!" Patricia screamed at the impeccably dressed receptionist, slamming her hand on the polished stone counter. "I am Patricia Blackwell, and you will tell that pathetic woman to get down here right now before we call the federal authorities." The receptionist did not flinch. She looked at the frantic group with complete professional detachment. She typed a single command into her computer, then gestured toward a dedicated private elevator bank. "The chief executive officer is expecting you," the receptionist stated calmly. "Please take the express elevator to the penthouse suite." Travis sneered, adjusting his collar as if trying to reclaim his lost dignity. "Let us go show my psychotic wife what happens when she plays games with real money." The five of them crammed into the elevator, the heavy steel doors sliding shut. The ascent to the penthouse was completely silent, the high-speed elevator pressing them into the floor. The doors opened with a soft chime, revealing a reception area that made the country club look like a cheap diner. Two security guards silently escorted the furious mob down a wide, art-lined corridor. They stopped in front of double doors crafted from solid oak. The guards pushed them open. They were escorted into a breathtaking corner office. The space was utterly massive, surrounded on three sides by floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic, godlike view of the entire city skyline. The sunlight poured in, illuminating the expensive minimalist furnishings. Sitting perfectly still behind a massive custom mahogany desk at the far end of the room was Clara. She did not look like the woman who had quietly served them holiday dinners. She wore a perfectly tailored charcoal power suit. Her posture was relaxed but commanding. Her phone was nowhere in sight. There was no trace of the nervous, accommodating daughter-in-law they had spent years systematically breaking down. She simply looked at them, her expression completely unreadable, projecting an aura of absolute terrifying control. Travis broke the silence. He stormed across the expensive Persian rug, his face twisted in a mask of furious arrogance. His mistress hurried to keep up her heels, clicking loudly. Travis stopped directly in front of the desk. He leaned forward, his eyes burning with venom, and violently slammed both of his hands flat against the polished wood. "You think a few fake corporate papers can scare us?" Travis yelled, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "Do you honestly expect me to believe this garbage? You hacked some accounts? You forged some eviction notices. You are committing federal fraud, Clara. You are just a project manager. You are nothing. I am going to have you thrown in prison for the rest of your miserable life." Patricia stepped up right beside him, her aristocratic snarl firmly back in place. "You have severely overplayed your hand. You ungrateful little rodent," Patricia hissed, pointing a trembling manicured finger at Clara. "You think you can steal my home? You think you can humiliate the Blackwell family? I will personally ensure you never work in this city again." Rachel pushed her way to the front, her voice a hysterical screech. "You ruined my boutique! You locked me out of my own business! You are a psycho!" Jamal hovered at the back of the group, his bravado entirely stripped away. He stared at the sheer scale of the office, his eyes darting nervously around the room. Unlike the Blackwells, Jamal understood the smell of real, untouchable money. The reality of Clara's power was slowly suffocating him. He recognized that the luxury he pretended to have was sitting right in front of him, wielding a very real axe. Travis slammed his fist on the desk again, demanding a response. "Say something, you lunatic! Undo this right now before I call the police." Clara did not flinch at the loud noise. She did not shrink back from their coordinated verbal assault. She simply let their screaming wash over her, allowing them to fully expose their desperate, pathetic entitlement. For 10 years she had bitten her tongue and absorbed their relentless cruelty. Now she held the absolute power to silence them forever. Clara slowly smiled. It was a cold, calculating, and devastating expression. She reached out and picked up a small, sleek remote, resting on the corner of her desk. She did not break eye contact with Travis as she pressed her thumb down and hit a single button. A soft, mechanical hum filled the room. The massive wall of frosted glass located directly behind her chair instantly cleared. It turned perfectly transparent, revealing the sprawling executive boardroom connected to her office. The screaming instantly stopped. Top corporate lawyers and federal auditors sat around the boardroom table staring directly at the family. The security guards shoved the heavy oak doors open. Patricia Travis, Rachel Jamal, and the young mistress furiously stormed into the breathtaking corner office of Lumina Spaces. The room was absolutely massive, wrapped entirely in gorgeous panoramic windows that overlooked the entire city skyline. Clara sat perfectly still behind a custom mahogany desk. She wore a perfectly tailored dark charcoal power suit, projecting an aura of terrifying control. "You have always possessed a remarkable talent for raising your voice when you completely run out of actual leverage," Clara stated. Her voice was low modulated and infinitely intimidating. She reached out and pulled a stack of 3 thick manila folders from the corner of her desk. She picked up the first folder and slid it smoothly across the mahogany surface. It stopped inches from Rachel's trembling hands. "Open it," Clara commanded. Rachel sobbed, shaking her head wildly. "I will save you the trouble," Clara continued, her tone clinical. "That folder contains the deed to the commercial high-rise located on Fifth Avenue. It contains the primary lease agreement you signed and the final immediate seizure mandate executed this morning. I own the building you simply could not afford to rent. You spent Thanksgiving telling my mother that retail requires a certain pedigree. You explicitly said I lacked the aesthetic vision to even walk through your doors. I decided you were right. I did not walk through them. I bolted them shut. Rachel let out a gut-wrenching wail, covering her face with both hands, finally realizing the catastrophic magnitude of her own supreme arrogance. Clara did not pause to let the emotion settle. She picked up the second manila folder and shoved it across the desk toward Jamal. The luxury broker flinched as the heavy cardboard slapped against the wood. You mocked my practical sedan at every family barbecue, Clara said, locking her eyes with Jamal. You told me that true wealth is always loud. You said people who drive economy vehicles are biologically programmed for total mediocrity. Open the folder, Jamal. Look at the comprehensive asset liquidation charts. Jamal swallowed hard, refusing to look down. I gutted the shadow fund that bought your plastic lifestyle, Clara declared, her voice dropping like an anvil. Every leased luxury car, every fraudulent line of credit, every single drop of fake liquidity you used to project your elite status was funded by a subsidiary of Lumina Holdings. I did not just repossess your Porsche, I permanently blacklisted your broker license across the entire eastern seaboard. You are financially radioactive. Jamal stumbled backward, crashing into the heavy oak door. He frantically grabbed the brass handle, desperate to escape the suffocating reality of the room, but the security guard standing outside had engaged the lock. He was trapped inside the slaughterhouse. Clara finally picked up the third and thickest manila folder. She did not slide this one. She picked it up and dropped it directly in the center of the desk with a heavy, definitive thud. She looked at Patricia. The older woman was shaking violently, her aristocratic posture entirely decimated. This folder contains the total debt acquisition of the Blackwell family estate, Clara stated smoothly. It contains the margin call documentation for Vanguard crypto strategies. It contains the absolute, undeniable mathematical proof that your son is a total fraud. Patricia opened her mouth to argue, but only a pathetic, raspy squeak emerged. For a decade, you paraded me around your country club like a charity case. Clara continued, her voice practically humming with suppressed energy. You loudly complained about my cheap suits. You told your friends I dragged down the visual value of your family photos. You explicitly told me to stay out of upper tax bracket spaces because I lacked the fundamental grace to belong there. Patricia squeezed her eyes shut, crying silently. I took your advice, Clara whispered, leaning forward slightly. I stayed out of them. I bought them instead. I bought your mortgage. I bought your country club memberships. I bought the debt on every single asset you used to pretend you are better than me. You do not have a legacy, Patricia. You have a massive unpaid invoice, and I am the only creditor. Travis suddenly lunged forward, his face completely purple with rage. He violently slammed both of his hands flat against the expensive wood of the desk. You think a few fake corporate papers can scare us? He yelled, spittle flying from his lips. You are just a project manager. You are nothing. I am going to sue you for every single dime of this fake company. Clara leaned back in her leather chair, calmly lacing her fingers together. She looked past him directly at the young, heavily Botoxed woman standing behind Travis. The mistress had been completely silent since stepping off the elevator. She had arrived wearing a smug, victorious smirk, carrying a designer handbag. She strutted into the building, expecting to witness her powerful boyfriend put his boring wife in her place. She expected a quick, easy divorce settlement followed by a lifetime of absolute luxury. But as Clara methodically dismantled the Blackwell empire piece by piece, the young woman's smirk had entirely vanished. She had watched Rachel immediately collapse in total financial ruin. She had listened as Clara detailed the absolute bankruptcy of the man she was currently sleeping with. The mistress slowly looked at the thick folders resting on the desk. She looked at Travis, who was still screaming about community property and lawsuits, completely oblivious to the undeniable truth Clara had laid out. The young woman slowly turned her head to look directly at Travis. Her eyes grew incredibly wide, filling with a sudden, horrifying realization of her own impending ruin. Clara slowly smiled, picking up a sleek remote from her desk. she hit a single small red button. The frosted glass behind her instantly cleared, revealing a boardroom full of top-tier corporate lawyers and financial auditors, all staring directly at the family. The stark revelation settled heavily over the lavish office. Travis stood completely frozen, his previous barrage of screaming threats evaporating into the chilled, air-conditioned space. He stared at the transparent glass wall, his mouth hanging slightly open, as a dozen top-tier corporate attorneys and forensic auditors stared back at him with absolute clinical detachment. They were silently documenting his every humiliating word. Next to him, the heavy silence was shattered by a sharp, sudden intake of breath. His young mistress took a slow, deliberate step backward. Her eyes darted from the manila folders to Travis. Her meticulously contoured face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. She had endured the public embarrassment in the driveway, confident that Travis possessed the financial firepower to crush his supposedly pathetic wife. Now the absolute truth was laid bare on the mahogany desk. She raised her hand, her acrylic nails catching the sunlight, and delivered a vicious, resounding slap directly across his cheek. The sharp crack echoed through the massive room, causing even Jamal to flinch. "You said you were a crypto millionaire!" she shrieked, her voice echoing off the glass walls. "You are broke." Ooh. Travis stumbled backward from the force of the impact, his hand flying to his reddening face. He opened his mouth to formulate an excuse to spin another desperate web of lies, but she did not give him the chance. She aggressively hoisted her designer knockoff bag onto her shoulder, her heels grinding into the expensive Persian rug. "You are a pathetic lying loser," she spat, refusing to lower her voice. She spun on her heel and stormed out of the office, pushing past the security guards without a single backward glance. Travis watched her disappear, utterly humiliated. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind her, sealing the remaining family members inside their self-made tomb. Patricia closed her eyes, unable to witness her golden child being stripped of his dignity in front of an audience of elite professionals. Rachel was still hyperventilating quietly in the corner, mourning her seized inventory. Jamal pressed his back against the wall, desperately wishing he could become invisible. All the bluster, the arrogance, and the aggressive entitlement that had defined Travis for his entire life completely evaporated. The invisible armor of wealth he had worn was entirely gone. He slowly turned back to face the mahogany desk. Clara remained perfectly still, her expression a mask of chilling tranquility. She did not gloat. She did not laugh. She simply watched him break. Travis looked at the transparent glass wall, locking eyes with the stony-faced lawyers evaluating his collapse. The sheer magnitude of his financial and personal destruction finally penetrated his thick skull. His legs suddenly gave out beneath him. The expensive fabric of his trousers snagged on the rug as he dropped heavily to his knees. The resounding thud echoed in the silent space. "Clara, please." Travis whimpered, his voice stripped of all its former booming authority. He clutched the edge of the desk, his knuckles turning white, as he stared up at the woman he had spent a decade underestimating. "You have to stop the foreclosure. You cannot seize my operating accounts. I will lose absolutely everything. The investors will file federal charges. I will face actual prison time." Clara stared down at him. "You are currently facing the exact consequences of your own fraudulent actions," she stated clinically. "I am merely enforcing the binding contracts you willingly signed." Travis shook his head frantically, desperation making his movements jerky and pathetic. He searched his mind for any remaining leverage, any possible lifeline he could exploit to save himself. His eyes lit up with a sudden desperate thought. He decided to use the only card he had left. "Think of our daughter," Travis cried out, his voice cracking with manufactured emotion. He attempted to use Lily as a human shield, an emotional pawn to manipulate the mother of his child. "You cannot do this to the father of your child. Lily needs a successful father." The temperature in the executive office seemed to plummet 20 degrees in a single second. The calm, detached aura that Clara had maintained throughout the entire confrontation instantly vanished. Her eyes darkened, transforming into chips of solid ice. Patricia let out a quiet gasp, recognizing the dangerous shift in the atmosphere. Even Jamal took another cautious step back. Travis had fundamentally miscalculated. He had assumed that invoking their daughter would soften her resolve, but he had merely ignited a deeply terrifying maternal rage. Clara slowly stood up from her chair, towering over the kneeling man. "Do not ever use my daughter as a bargaining chip," Clara said, her voice dropping to a lethal reverberating whisper that carried across the vast room. "You forfeited the right to call yourself her father the moment you prioritized your fake empire over her well-being. You drained her college savings to fund your mistress. You skipped her birthdays to close fraudulent deals. You are not a father. You are a biological technicality." Travis opened his mouth, stammering for a rebuttal, but Clara was entirely finished listening. She slowly reached toward the sleek keyboard on her desk. Her movements were extremely deliberate and meticulously measured, offering zero room for negotiation. The prominent lawyers assembled inside the adjacent boardroom leaned forward in their chairs, carefully watching the final execution unfold in real time. Clara's expression remained locked in pure ice. She extended her hand and tapped a single button on her keyboard. The massive high-definition office speakers embedded in the ceiling roared to life. A crystal-clear audio recording instantly began to play aggressively, filling the entire penthouse suite. The sound of Travis's own voice echoed loudly through the room, captured perfectly during a secret phone call he had made months ago. Travis remained on his knees, his eyes widening in absolute paralyzing horror. His ultimate betrayal was currently broadcasting. He was completely destroyed. Clara watched him burn. She had thoroughly won. The crisp audio filled the penthouse office, echoing off the glass walls. It was a recording from the hallway of their former home, captured by the security system Clara had discreetly installed. Heavy footsteps were followed by the terrifying roar of Travis's voice. "You do not speak to me like that, you ungrateful little brat," Travis bellowed. A sharp scuffle sounded, followed instantly by the terrified shriek of 7-year-old Lily. "Let me go. You are hurting me." Lily sobbed, her voice breathless with panic. "Leave Mommy alone. She is doing all the work while you just yell." "Your mother is a pathetic nobody," Travis snarled. A heavy thud indicated he had violently grabbed the child and shoved her. "I am the king of this house. You respect me or I will lock you in your room." The recording captured Lily weeping uncontrollably, begging for her mother, while Travis continued to hurl vile insults at a child simply because she dared to defend Clara. In the executive office, the silence was deafening. The corporate lawyers in the adjacent boardroom stared at Travis with undisguised disgust. The facade of the loving family man was incinerated, leaving behind a violent coward. Jamal backed away, pressing himself against the wall. Rachel covered her mouth with both hands, finally seeing her golden child brother for the monster he truly was. Patricia stared straight ahead, her face a rigid mask, refusing to acknowledge the horrifying reality of her son's actions. Travis remained on his knees, his jaw trembling. He looked frantically between the glaring attorneys and his wife. The color drained from his face, leaving him ashen. Clara did not break eye contact. Her expression was a terrifying portrait of absolute Arctic calm. She reached into her desk and pulled out a thick document bound in legal blue backing. She tossed it onto the polished wood. It slid across the surface, coming to a halt right at the edge of the desk, inches from Travis's face. "You brought up my daughter Clara," said her voice, dropping to a lethal whisper. "You actually thought you could walk into my headquarters after bankrupting your company and abusing my child, and use Lily as an emotional pawn to save your miserable financial life." Travis stared blankly at the legal document, his eyes unable to focus on the bold print. "That is a permanent court-approved restraining order," Clara stated, her words cutting like a scalpel. "A superior court judge listened to that exact recording less than an hour ago. He signed the mandate immediately. He granted me full sole physical and legal custody of Lily. You have zero visitation rights. You have zero parental rights. You are entirely stripped of your title as a father." Travis let out a pathetic gasp, reaching out with a shaking hand to touch the paper. "If you step within 100 feet of me," Clara continued, her tone merciless, "or if you step within 100 feet of Lily, her school, or this building, you will be arrested on the spot. You will go straight to federal prison for violating a Supreme Court mandate, and you will stay there for a very long time." "No!" Travis sobbed, his voice cracking into a high hysterical pitch. "Clara, please! I was just stressed. The crypto fund was failing. I did not mean to hurt her. You cannot take my child away from me. I have nothing left." "You had nothing to begin with," Clara corrected coldly. "You built a house of cards using my money, and you chose to burn it down with your own arrogance. You are not a victim. You are a consequence." Clara gestured to the security guards standing by the heavy oak doors. They stepped forward, crossing the rug with purposeful strides. Each guard grabbed one of Travis's arms, hauling him up from his knees with brutal efficiency. Travis dissolved into a complete, humiliating panic. He kicked and thrashed, dragging his expensive shoes across the floor as the guards forcefully marched him toward the exit. "Mom, do something!" Travis shrieked, tears streaming down his face as he desperately looked at Patricia. "Tell her to stop, Mom. Please." Patricia did not move a single muscle. She stood perfectly rigid, watching coldly as her favorite son was physically dragged out of the suite, weeping like a child. The heavy doors slammed shut behind him, cutting off his sobbing and plunging the office back into a tense, suffocating silence. Clara shifted her piercing gaze to the remaining Blackwells. Jamal was actively sweating, calculating his own escape. Rachel looked utterly destroyed, mourning the loss of her boutique. Clara looked at Patricia. The matriarch had just witnessed the absolute obliteration of her son, the public revelation of his violent abuse, and the total bankruptcy of her entire bloodline. She stood in the office of the woman she had tormented for a decade, who now owned every asset tied to the Blackwell name. Logically, Patricia should have been begging for mercy. Patricia slowly lifted her chin. She smoothed her ruined, tear-stained linen suit with trembling hands. She squared her shoulders, summoning a horrifying, delusional reservoir of arrogance. She looked down her nose at Clara, her eyes blazing with toxic pride. "You think you have won because you bought a few debts and played a recording," Patricia declared, her voice dripping with contempt. "You are nothing but a temporary inconvenience. The Blackwell legacy is built on ironclad relationships. I still have the country club anniversary gala tonight. The most powerful families will be there." Rachel looked at her mother in sheer disbelief. "Mom, what are you talking about? We have nothing." "Be quiet, Rachel." Patricia snapped her gaze, remaining locked on Clara. "I will walk into that gala tonight, and I will find wealthy investors. I will secure the capital to bail out this family, and I will ensure your corporate stunt is crushed. I am a Blackwell. You will never destroy my social standing." The crystal chandeliers of the Oak Bridge Heritage Club cast a warm golden glow over the opulent ballroom, illuminating a sea of crimson. Patricia Blackwell had completely drained her remaining heavily overextended lines of credit to blanket the sprawling venue in tens of thousands of imported red roses for her ruby anniversary gala. The floral arrangements cascaded down the grand staircase and framed the towering arched windows, creating a suffocatingly rich perfume that hung heavily in the air. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos glided flawlessly through the crowd of local politicians, venture capitalists, and old money socialites, balancing silver trays loaded with vintage champagne and caviar. Patricia stood near the center of the room, clutching a crystal flute so tightly her knuckles were white. She wore a heavy velvet gown that masked her violent trembling. She was actively working the room, smiling until her facial muscles ached, desperately hunting for a financial lifeline. She cornered a prominent real estate developer near the ice sculpture, laughing aggressively at a joke that was not funny. She seamlessly shifted the conversation toward a fabricated exclusive investment opportunity, heavily implying that the Blackwell empire was merely looking for select partners to share in a temporary, highly lucrative expansion phase. She painted a picture of unyielding prosperity, completely omitting the fact that Clara had systematically bought every single shred of their debt and currently held the keys to their entire existence. The developer smiled politely, promising to have his people look at the numbers on Monday, before smoothly excusing himself to speak with a senator. Patricia swallowed a surge of bitter panic. The entire evening was a masterclass in aggressive deception. Rachel stood near the bar downing her third martini, her eyes darting nervously toward the entrance. Jamal was conspicuously absent, having vanished entirely after the catastrophe in Clara's office. Travis was currently sitting in a holding cell, but Patricia had effortlessly informed the inquiring guests that her son was closing a vital overseas merger. She was orchestrating the ultimate illusion, determined to charm her way out of utter ruin. The champagne flowed, the string quartet played a lively symphony, and Patricia finally spotted the CEO of a major regional bank. She adjusted her diamond necklace, pasted on a predatory smile, and marched across the marble floor to secure the backdoor loan that would resurrect her family. Before Patricia could even extend her hand to greet the banker, the grand mahogany doors at the entrance of the ballroom violently swung open. The heavy wood struck the brass stoppers with a resounding crack that instantly silenced the string quartet. The lively chatter of 300 elite guests died in a matter of seconds, replaced by a collective stunned silence. Patricia froze, her hands suspended mid-air as she slowly turned toward the foyer. Clara stepped over the threshold, moving with the lethal, effortless grace of an apex predator. She was no longer wearing the severe charcoal power suit from the office. Instead, she was draped in a breathtaking, custom-tailored haute couture gown that commanded absolute authority. The dress was a midnight blue masterpiece of silk and structured chiffon, catching the chandelier light and radiating an aura of undeniable, untouchable wealth. It was not loud or flashy, it was the epitome of quiet, terrifying power. She wore no excessive jewelry, only a simple, flawless diamond pendant that rested against her collarbone. Her posture was perfectly straight, her chin elevated, and her gaze swept across the room of panicked elites with supreme indifference. Holding her left hand was 7-year-old Lily. The little girl wore a beautiful age-appropriate silver dress, her hair neatly braided. Lily looked up at her mother with total trust, completely unaffected by the hundreds of staring eyes. Clara squeezed her daughter's hand reassuringly, projecting an impenetrable shield of safety around the child. The guests, many of whom had listened to Patricia, mock Clara's supposed lack of pedigree for years, completely parted like the Red Sea. They instinctively stepped back, clearing a wide, unobstructed path down the center of the ballroom. Clara walked slowly and deliberately across the marble floor, her heels clicking rhythmically in the dead-silent room. She did not look at the politicians. She did not acknowledge the socialites. She walked directly toward the towering wall of red roses where Patricia was standing paralyzed. The carefully constructed facade of the Ruby Anniversary Gala imploded the exact second Clara stopped 10 feet away from the matriarch. Patricia felt the blood completely drain from her face, leaving her chalky and hollow. The sight of her former daughter-in-law looking like absolute royalty, while holding the granddaughter Travis was legally barred from touching, triggered a catastrophic psychological break. All of the desperate networking, the expensive floral arrangements, and the lies about overseas mergers instantly dissolved into sheer, unadulterated madness. Patricia's eyes widened wildly, her chest heaving as she completely lost her mind. She dropped her crystal champagne flute. It shattered against the marble floor, sending shards of expensive glass and alcohol splashing across the polished stone. She ignored the mess, frantically spinning around to search the perimeter of the stunned crowd. She aggressively flagged down the club's head of security and the general manager, who were already rushing toward the commotion. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at Clara's face, her composure utterly decimated. "This woman is permanently banned from my family events." Patricia screamed, her voice cracking into a shrill, hysterical shriek that echoed violently off the vaulted ceilings. "She clearly does not belong here. Throw this absolute trash out immediately. She is trespassing on private property, and I demand that you physically remove her from my sight before she completely ruins the single most important evening of my entire life. Do your pathetic jobs and get her far, far away from my important guests. I am Patricia Ann Blackwell, and I refuse to be humiliated by a worthless project manager who thinks she can just simply walk into my club." The general manager rushed forward through the parted crowd. Patricia watched him approach with a triumphant glint in her eyes. She stood taller, adjusting the heavy velvet of her gown, fully expecting to witness Clara being dragged out of the grand ballroom. She envisioned her former daughter-in-law being tossed into the cold night. But the general manager did not reach for Clara. Instead, he stopped precisely 2 feet in front of Clara and Lily. He bowed deeply. It was a profound, deferential bow. Patricia felt the breath leave her lungs. Her outstretched arms, still pointing aggressively at Clara, began to tremble uncontrollably. The triumphant smirk melted off her face, replaced by a mask of uncomprehending horror. She opened her mouth to shout another command, to demand that the manager do his job, but her vocal cords seized. The general manager offered Clara a smile. He turned his back on Patricia, ignoring her hysterical demands. He walked briskly toward the small podium at the front of the ballroom. He reached out and grasped the sleek silver microphone. The high-pitched feedback whined for a fraction of a second, instantly commanding the attention of the 300 affluent guests. "Ladies and gentlemen," the general manager announced, his deep, resonant voice echoing clearly through the massive speakers and bouncing off the vaulted, frescoed ceilings. "May I please have your complete attention for a brief, highly important announcement regarding the future of the Oakbridge Heritage Club." The room fell silent. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes ceased. The politicians, real estate developers, and legacy socialites turned their gaze toward the stage. Patricia stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "As many of you are aware, our prestigious institution has been undergoing a period of financial transition." The manager continued, his tone smooth and unwavering. "Tonight, I am proud to announce that this transition has reached a spectacular conclusion. Please welcome the new majority stakeholder of the Oakbridge Heritage Club, an investor who just finalized the outright purchase of 60% of our controlling shares. Ladies and gentlemen, please direct your attention to Ms. Clara." A collective gasp swept through the opulent ballroom. The sound of 300 wealthy individuals losing their composure was staggering. The elite crowd stared at the stunning woman in the haute couture gown. Whispers ignited like wildfire across the marble floor. The politicians and venture capitalists, the people Patricia had spent the last 3 hours trying to con into a backdoor loan, immediately began calculating the sheer magnitude of wealth required to buy a controlling stake in the historic club. It was a sum that dwarfed the Blackwell family's entire net worth. Clara did not smile. She maintained her terrifying Arctic calm. She gently squeezed Lily's hand, gave her a reassuring nod, and walked gracefully toward the stage. The crowd parted even wider, offering her the reverent space her new status commanded. She ascended the wooden steps, her heels clicking definitively, and stepped up to the podium. The general manager stepped aside, bowing his head respectfully as he handed her the microphone. Clara gripped the silver stand. She looked over the sea of faces, her gaze sweeping past the local politicians and the old money matriarchs, until her eyes locked directly onto Patricia. The older woman was shaking violently now, her velvet gown suddenly heavy and suffocating. "I heard you like holding family votes," Patricia Clara stated. Her voice was cool, modulated, and infinitely powerful. The high-definition speakers carried her words to every single corner of the room. "You spent the last decade orchestrating pathetic little votes at your dining table to exclude me, to belittle me, and to remind me that I did not belong in your exclusive circle. You made very sure I knew my place." Patricia squeezed her eyes shut, unable to escape the inescapable public execution of her legacy. Rachel, standing near the bar, pressed her hands against her face, completely paralyzed by the unfolding catastrophe. "Well, I own the circle now," Clara declared, her words dropping like heavy stones. "Since we are all gathered here for your heavily financed Ruby Anniversary Gala, I think it is only fitting that we hold one final definitive vote. Let us hold a club vote right now." Clara leaned forward slightly, her eyes boring into Patricia's crumbling facade. "I motion to permanently revoke Patricia Blackwell's lifetime membership to the Oakbridge Heritage Club," Clara announced smoothly. "I base this motion on her impending bankruptcy, her systemic history of corporate fraud, and the massive, completely unpaid club tabs she accrued over the last 6 months to maintain her fake lifestyle. All in favor of immediately expelling this financial liability from our premises, raise your hand." The silence that followed was suffocating. Patricia opened her eyes, her chest heaving as she looked around the lavish ballroom. She looked at the prominent real estate developer she had just been laughing with near the ice sculpture. She looked at the regional bank CEO she had planned to corner for a loan. She looked at the women she had played tennis with for 20 years, the same women who had ruthlessly gossiped with her about Clara's cheap suits. She silently begged her lifelong friends to stand by her to defend the Blackwell honor, to reject this hostile takeover. Slowly, the real estate developer raised his right hand into the air. Patricia let out a strangled gasp. Then the regional bank CEO raised his hand. Within 5 seconds, the movement spread across the room like a tidal wave of betrayal. The politicians raised their hands. The old money socialites raised their hands. The venture capitalists raised their hands. One by one, every single person Patricia had ever tried to impress, every person she had considered an ally, lifted their arms toward the frescoed ceiling. They turned their backs on the bankrupt, humiliated matriarch, eagerly aligning themselves with the terrifying power and infinite wealth of the new billionaire owner. The unanimous sea of raised hands hung in the perfumed air, a devastating silent verdict delivered by the very society Patricia Blackwell had worshipped her entire life. The local politicians, the wealthy matriarchs, and the venture capitalists kept their arms elevated, their faces turned firmly away from the woman who had just been spectacularly stripped of her crown. Patricia stared at the backs of her lifelong friends, her mind violently rejecting the reality of her total social excommunication. The crushing weight of the absolute humiliation finally shattered her delicate psychological defenses. Her knees buckled beneath the heavy velvet of her expensive unpaid gown. She let out a high, raspy wheeze, her eyes rolling back into her head, and she collapsed in a dead faint. She hit the polished marble floor with a heavy thud, the diamond pendant around her neck scattering the bright chandelier light. Not a single member of the elite crowd stepped forward to catch her or offer any assistance. They merely parted further, treating her unconscious form like a contagious disease. Rachel let out a terrified shriek, but she did not run to help Patricia. The sheer panic of being associated with this radioactive level of public disgrace completely overrode any lingering sense of familial loyalty. She looked wildly around the room, making eye contact with Jamal, who was already inching toward the exit. Without a word, the siblings abandoned their unconscious mother on the cold marble floor. They shoved their way through the heavy oak service doors, sprinting blindly down the back corridors and fleeing into the night to escape the paralyzing stares of the crowd. The swift and brutal dismantling of the Blackwell empire played out over the following weeks with absolute precision. Clara executed every single legal mandate and foreclosure document without an ounce of hesitation or mercy, methodically stripping the family of their stolen wealth. Patricia awoke from her fainting spell in the back of an ambulance, only to find the gates of her sprawling estate permanently padlocked by federal auditors. The bank seized her luxury vehicles, her frozen accounts, and her remaining jewelry. Within a month, the former queen of the Oakbridge Heritage Club was forced to move into a cramped, low-income studio apartment situated directly above a noisy bowling alley on the outskirts of the city. The tiny, poorly ventilated room smelled of stale grease and damp carpet, a stark contrast to the imported red roses she had once commanded. She spent her days sitting in a cheap vinyl chair, staring blankly at a flickering television set, entirely isolated from the world that had so easily discarded her. Jamal faced an equally devastating reality. With his broker license permanently revoked across the eastern seaboard, and his fraudulent lines of credit completely liquidated, his plastic lifestyle evaporated overnight. He was forced to sell his designer suits to pay off his mounting legal fees. Stripped of his elite status, he found himself behind the wheel of a rented economy sedan, working grueling 14-hour shifts as a rideshare driver just to survive. He drove drunken college students and angry businessmen through the very downtown streets he used to rule, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles as passengers complained about his driving and spilled cheap coffee on his frayed floor mats. Every notification chime from his driving app was a harsh reminder of the lucrative shadow fund Clara had ruthlessly gutted. Travis fared worst of all. His raging arrogance blinded him to the severity of the permanent restraining order Clara had secured. Convinced he could still intimidate his former wife into surrendering her newfound empire, he foolishly approached the Lumina Holdings headquarters 2 weeks after the gala. He did not even make it past the front lobby. The security team triggered the silent alarm and federal marshals descended upon the building in minutes. Travis was aggressively tackled to the concrete, handcuffed and dragged into a heavily armored vehicle. He currently sat in a sterile concrete jail cell wearing a bright orange jumpsuit that swallowed his diminished frame. The booming voice he had used to terrorize his family was completely useless against the thick iron bars and the silent, imposing prison guards who ignored his endless demands for a phone call. He was utterly powerless, locked away from the daughter he had abused and the society he had tried to manipulate. Months later, the suffocating darkness of the Blackwell legacy felt like a distant, irrelevant memory. The morning sun poured over the expansive glass-walled balcony of a sprawling downtown penthouse, illuminating a scene of absolute serenity. Clara sat at a sleek glass table sipping freshly brewed coffee from a delicate porcelain cup. She wore a comfortable, soft cashmere robe, her shoulders relaxed, her face radiating a profound, untouchable peace. The breathtaking panoramic view of the city skyline stretched out before her, a sprawling network of commercial high-rises and bustling streets that she now effectively controlled. Lily sat across from her, happily eating a plate of golden waffles covered in fresh berries. The little girl looked vibrant and healthy, her eyes bright with a genuine joy that had been missing for years. She swung her legs playfully beneath the table, the morning breeze gently catching her braided hair. There was no screaming, no tension, no looming threat of violent outbursts. The penthouse was a fortress of safety and warmth, a physical manifestation of the freedom Clara had meticulously built from the ashes of her oppression. Lily paused, placing her silver fork carefully on the edge of her plate. She looked up, her gaze shifting past the balcony railing to the towering skyscrapers gleaming in the morning light. She tilted her head, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. "Mom," Lily asked, her voice soft, "do we ever have to see those mean people again?" Clara set her coffee cup down. She stood up and pulled Lily into a tight